You've undoubtedly heard claims from some politicians, or maybe one in particular, of supposed voter fraud affecting elections. But you hopefully know by now that voter fraud almost never happens. It's very rare. But there was a time in American history where there was a huge and very real voter fraud scandal. It was so big that when the dust settled, 1,679 people were convicted. And despite how huge this was, almost nobody today knows about this. Until now. At the turn of the last century in Adams County, Ohio, election season was an open market. It wasn't about what a candidate stood for, but about which candidate would pay the most money for your vote. Buying a vote could cost as little as a shot of whiskey, all the way up to $25, which is a bit more than $800 today. Most people sold their votes for an amount somewhere in between. The money flowed, and presumably, so did the whiskey. Here's one example. In just 1 year, 1887, two politicians spent between them $30,000, almost $1 million adjusted for inflation, buying votes for their party in Adams County. When I say election season was an open market, I mean it in a very literal sense. People would actually stand on soapboxes in front of the courthouse offering their votes to the highest bidder. In the early years of vote buying, politicians would hand out cash in exchange for just a promise of a vote. I'd say, sure, I'll vote for you, give me $20. But then, if you buy my vote, how do you know I really voted for you? So things got more sophisticated. When you buy my vote, you'd give the money to a middleman. Then I go to a voting booth and fill out my ballot. Then I'd show my ballot to a judge who verified that I voted the way I said I would. Then the judge would signal to the middleman, who would hand over the money. It was like buying drugs on a street corner where you don't want to be seen handing money directly to the dealer. I mean, I've heard. Remember, this was shortly after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction era. The Transcontinental Railroad was just built to connect the coasts, and industries developed along the rail lines, bringing new opportunities. But when railroads were built in Ohio, they went around Adams County because it was just too hilly. So there was no access to larger markets, no manufacturing development, and no real connection with the rest of the country. A lot of the people selling their votes were poor farm laborers who could really use the money. And of course, it was always a man whose vote was for sale. Remember, women couldn't vote at this time. And there were, in fact, women who protested against the whole idea of buying and selling votes. But still, some women found ways to get involved. Mothers sold the votes of their sons and husbands. Sisters sold their brothers' votes. It was fun for the whole family. If you were a young man growing up in Adams County, you couldn't wait until you turned 21 and were old enough to vote. Not because you wanted to participate in the joys of democracy, but because you could make a little spending money selling your vote. And why not? Your father, teacher, doctor, even your preacher has been selling their votes your whole life. So as far as you know, it's totally normal and acceptable. And this went on for decades. In fact, it was estimated that over 30 years, there were only 4 elections in Adams County that could be considered honest elections. Sometimes two politicians would agree, let's do this fair, no buying votes. But then one of them would go out and buy votes, and then the other would hear about it and buy votes, and before long, more money was spent buying votes than ever before. Then someone finally developed a conscience. There was a federal judge named A.Z. Blair. Now, he himself had actually bought votes in the past, but in December of 1910, he decided that enough was enough, and he was going to put an end to all this. So he convened a grand jury. It had 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and 1 Prohibitionist. He made sure it was bipartisan so it wouldn't seem like this was all politically motivated, and I guess the Prohibitionist was there to make sure nobody had any fun. There was actually no real need for a fact-finding investigation because, of course, everyone knew what was happening. But he needed the grand jury in order to hand down all the indictments, and to do that, he still needed evidence. So Judge Blair brought in several hundred of the vote buyers, like these guys, and offered them immunity from prosecution if they would provide the names of all the people who sold them their votes in the last election. Next, the judge wrote a notice that he ran in newspapers, announcing that he now knew who sold their votes and indictments would be coming. Unless persons who received money at the last election come in at once and enter their plea, the sheriff will be directed to arrest them as fast as they are indicted. Well, people freaked out. Hundreds of people rushed to the courthouse to confess. The New York Times said, They arrived in automobiles and wagons drawn by horses, mules, and oxen, on horseback and afoot. Some of them walked for miles to get there. This 65-year-old woman named Mrs. Furtwanger walked 18 miles in the dark, in the snow, carrying a lantern to plead guilty on behalf of her disabled son and her husband. Not everyone was so quick to admit what they did. These 4 guys refused, and the judge sentenced them to prison time and apparently a badass photo shoot. Their sentences were suspended a few days later, but making an example of them prompted even more people to turn themselves in. Eventually, 1/4 of the voting population of Adams County was convicted, and that was just looking at one election. A later investigation showed that the actual number of people who bought or sold votes at some point was likely as high as 85% of voters. The typical sentence was $25 plus 6 months in prison plus 5 years of disenfranchisement. But in reality, the sentence and most of the fine were suspended, leaving people paying just $5 fines, which is around $165 today, and losing their right to vote for 5 years. Now, a lot of people said Judge Blair wasn't being fair. Why did the vote buyers get immunity and only the vote sellers were punished? But Blair's thinking was that if he sent all the vote buyers to prison, that would pretty much mean the county's whole political structure would collapse and cause chaos. Focusing on the vote sellers would end the practice without completely disrupting the county. And the judge actually received death threats over this decision. But in general, people thought he handled it right. Even Theodore Roosevelt said Judge Blair had done a great service, and he praised the people of Adams County as good people who went wrong and then corrected the wrong. Now, at the time I'm recording this, I have just received my mail-in ballot for the 2024 election, and to be clear, it is not up for sale. I know the real value is in actually using it, but I may still be drinking whiskey as I watch the election results come in anyway. This election cycle has been absolutely insane, with more ups and downs than I can remember in any election of my lifetime. With so much misinformation among the actual craziness, it's hard to keep track of everything that's going on and even know what's real. But there's a great video series you can watch that helps make sense of it all. It's called What to Follow USA, made by the folks at TLDR News. Each week, they recap the major events of the week leading up to the election, putting it in context. Is a news story just the kind of fodder the media likes to puff up, or is it something really important that you should follow? It's a nonpartisan news show delivered with just the right amount of humor, and you can only find it on Nebula. That's because What to Follow USA is a Nebula original, part of Nebula's news division, where you'll also find War Room, a Nebula original covering the latest updates in ongoing wars and global conflicts, so you can understand what's happening and why. You can also get daily news recaps from Morning Brew, plus global and business news from TLDR, all ad-free. And outside the news category, you'll find some of the smartest creators, covering pop culture, science, history, and more. Plus, creative Nebula original films like the sci-fi thriller Identities and the dark comedy Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend. And you'll find my videos there too, not just ad-free, but some also with bonus content. And the unique thing about Nebula is that it's owned by the creators whose content you see there. So when you sign up for Nebula, you're supporting the people who make the videos, including me. And if you sign up using my link at go.nebula.tv/ironicsands, or just click the link in the description, you not only support me directly, but you get Nebula for 40% off annual plans, which is just $3 a month. That's less than the cost of buying someone's vote in Adams County, Ohio. Your support helps me and everyone else at Nebula grow and do great things. So check it out, links down below. Now let's see, Harris Walls. Thanks for watching. See you next time.